Now, chances are you may not have heard a lot about the recent prison strikes that have been happening all over the country. Now, it's actually received very little attention in national media. Now, some are starting to pick it up, especially because, understandably, the Cohen-Manafort stories and the constant madness that we hear from the White House. Nonetheless, it is actually incredibly important because of what they're fighting for. Now, according to The Guardian, prison reform advocacy groups liaisoning with strike organizers on Wednesday said that protests had been confirmed in 3 states, with further unconfirmed reports emerging from Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. In total, it's going to hit about 17 different states. Now, the reason that this, well, there's a couple of different reasons. I believe that the prison strikes have actually started. But the confirmed cases relate to a hunger strike from Folsom State Prison back in California. Now, a 26-year-old inmate called Gerardo Garcia had released a smartphone recording of himself refusing to eat. The video was, of course, posted on Twitter and ended up going viral. In that video, Garcia could be heard saying, "Burritos or not eating today, protest, I'm hunger striking right now." The second confirmed action was in the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma, Washington, where as many as 200 detained immigrants joined the nationwide protest. So let me give you the details on why this is happening, because a lot of people might be wondering, well, okay, but what are they striking for? And the second question is, why should we care? Well, for one, let's get to what stirred the protests. Now, the 19-day strike is the first in such nationwide action in the U.S. in 2 years, and was triggered by April's rioting in Lee Correctional Institution in South Carolina, in which 7 inmates were killed. Now, it's also on the anniversary of George Jackson, a Black Panther and prison advocate who also died inside of prison. Now, of course, one of the issues that they're talking about is, of course, people dying in prisons all over the United States. In fact, there's some disastrous numbers on that. In fact, in Mississippi, 10 inmates have died in their cells in the past 3 weeks alone, with no firm indication on the causes of death. Not only that, but you also have an issue with prison labor. For example, we can go to California, where prison inmates have been battling wildfires, and they've been doing so with little or no pay. Now, that's an incredibly dangerous job and incredibly important. What we're doing is we're basically taking people from prison and shoving them into the path of wildfires and saying, "Here, fight this fire. Here's a hose. Have at it, hoss." Look, I understand the community service, right? But this is far beyond community service. This is fighting wildfires. In addition to that, you also have terrible conditions. In the modern world, conditions here in American prisons are terrible when you compare it to countries in Europe. But of course, and going back here to conditions for a second, Joe Arpaio, his prisons, terrible conditions. Sheriff Clark. Now, in Sheriff Clark, and I remember doing a story where in one of his prisons, Wisconsin jails, you had a pregnant woman who gave birth in her cell, did not get medical attention. You know what happened? Her baby died. Why? No medical attention. If you're pro-life, you should be outraged at Sheriff Clark. And to think he didn't know what was going on in his jails? No, the fish rots from the head down. So, yes, it is his fault. But again, their main concern is the issue of basically turning prisons into modern-day slavery. And let me go explain how it works. Private corporations can contract prison labor, right? Prisons are then allowed to garnish wages that those inmates make from those contracts. Now, they take that money and they put it into something called a private sector prison industry expansion account. So you go out, you're an inmate, you get sent to work, supposedly making money, and then that money is taken mostly by the prison and then given back to the companies. That money is actually also used to attract more business and reimburse prisons for the supposed cost of prison labor. Now, this basically is an incentive to lawmakers. Now, lawmakers get legalized bribes by the prisons, right? Now, the prisons are increasingly privatized. So these politicians get the bribes from private prisons, make laws that ended up incarcerating more people. And of course, the more people that are incarcerated are now being used by companies as a cheap labor pool. And then, of course, these private prisons can take most of the gains for themselves. These companies don't have to pay these workers all that much. So the corporations end up winning greatly under our system, which is gross. We've gone from a system that is supposed to rehabilitate people, right? And make sure that you don't reoffend, that you serve your time for society or to society, and then you could go back and you could be a productive citizen. But our system is incentivized to keep people in prison so they can be a cheap labor pool. It's a system that is based solely on profit. And unfortunately, when you have a system that has a profit motive in locking up people in these prisons, well, then you're going to end up with a system that locks more people up because there is that incentive. Now, the strikers, of course, they know this. They've been living this system, and they're tired of it. Now, the strikers, led by a network of incarcerated activists who call themselves Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, have put out a set of 10 demands to overhaul America's penal system. High up on the list is an end to forced or underpaid labor that the prosecutors call a form of, the protesters call a form of modern slavery. Now, Kevin Rashid Johnson, who was serving a life sentence in Sussex State Prison in Waverly, Virginia, writes in The Guardian that he sees prison work as, quote, slave labor that still exists in the United States in 2018. In fact, slavery never ended in this country. It just got basically privatized and put into our prison system, built into our prison system. Other demands, of course, include more investment in rehabilitation services, better medical treatment for mentally ill prisoners, and of course, ways to try to stop the deaths going on in prison. Now, in case you think that this was a violent strike, no, among the main tactics that are being deployed are a refusal to work, a boycott of purchases at prison commissaries, sit-ins, and hunger strikes. So this is completely non-violent. This is completely peaceful. Nonetheless, here's the question of why you should care, right? Now, look, a lot of people are in prison because of non-violent offenses. That includes a lot of drug charges. And some are just in jail awaiting trial for other non-violent offenses. People that maybe can't afford the cash bail system, which should be abolished, because then that creates a two-tier justice system, one for rich people, one for poor. And not only that, but there are people in jail for breaking immigration law. So, no, it's not only murderers, rapists, violent criminals, etc. No, you have people in there that haven't actually hurt other people, but have smoked a plant or were in possession of a substance that the government says you shouldn't have. There's a lot of people locked up for minor crimes or for crimes that shouldn't be crimes that are being exploited by these private companies and that are living in terrible conditions. And here's the kicker. Even if you don't care about their human rights, at least consider the fact that these jobs that could actually be done by regular workers at a decent wage. They're taking these prisoners and putting them in jobs for the private sector that could have been your job. And they're doing so they can pay them such a low wage that is basically free, either free or near free labor. If you don't see a problem with slave labor in 2018, then maybe you're blind to it. Maybe you're not a good person. Look, I believe that prisoners should have fundamental rights to humane treatment. Just because you commit a crime doesn't mean that you should lose your humanity and that you should be exploited. I understand that there's an issue of safety for prison guards, for people who are watching over the prison. But look, if you make the system more humane, then you're not going to have violence, or you're going to have less violence. I mean, look, Europe is a great example, right? Look at how they treat prisoners, and look at how much recidivism they have. How many people are repeat offenders? In America, 68%, according to 2015 data by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 68% of offenders are reincarcerated within 3 years. That's our recidivism rate. It's incredibly high. Insanely high. I thought we're supposed to have a system of rehabilitation. We don't. We don't. Right now, our system makes people, look, I think it has the effect of hardening people, making people unable to easily transition back into into society. They do not do a good job. Now, who does a good job? Scandinavian countries, unsurprisingly. They have recidivism rates within the 20 to 30% range. They also have an incredibly low prison population, whereas in America, we house a quarter of the world's prisoners. Not only that, but prisons are actually safer in Europe for officers. In fact, European correctional officers do not face extensive stress and related effects, such as higher rates of alcoholism and suicide and reduced life expectancy seen in the U.S. system. And not only that, but look, Germany is a good example here. Most crimes in Germany are punishable by fines. And they're fines that are geared more towards your socioeconomic status. So it won't destroy you if you're poor, and it won't be a slap on the wrist if you're rich. It'll be fair. And so that's one way that they've reduced incarceration rates. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we should look at some of the other systems that have better results. Less people in prison. And look, Europe, if you want to argue, look, yeah, but the European system costs so much more per prisoner. I hear you. Maybe that's a good reason to keep less people in prison. And that's what they're doing. They balance it out by actually having very few prisoners in their jails. We could learn something. We could learn something. Because right now, the way that we're going, it's already bad enough, but it's about to get worse. Now, are we going to change? No, not at the moment. As long as there's a profit motive for locking people up in America, this problem is only going to get worse. We've got to fix that system. And look, I actually support the prisoner strike, because they're finally bringing these issues to light. And if we bring it to light, then we can actually work to fix it. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.